This is the Fiction Nonfiction podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your Twitter feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm V.V. Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Love Marriage.
And I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And we're taping this episode on the weekend after Trump supporters attempted a coup. The prior Sunday, Whit said we should do this episode on conspiracy theorists and QAnon
And then on Wednesday, conspiracy theorists or conspiracy terrorists attacked the Capitol.
Yeah. So, I mean, Whitney, do you have a really good magic 8-ball or...
I don't know, common sense, I think, would tell that, if you're paying attention, I don't think this should have been really super surprising.
Yeah, let's go with common sense. I mean, to be fair, you predicted this, I predicted this, a lot of people predicted this. A number of federal agencies tasked with the security of elected officials in government buildings apparently did not predict this. And in the coming weeks, I hope we hear about the mostly white naivete that made that possible.
But just to start off this episode, to set the stage for our listeners, we're going to talk about what we mean when we talk about conspiracy theories that played a role in the storming of the Capitol last week. First, there's the whole QAnon conspiracy theory, which is sort of like the Dungeons and Dragons of right-wing conspiracies in the sense that it has these endless sidetracks and permutations.
But the definition of QAnon, according to The Guardian, sounds like this, and I'm quoting here: QAnon is a baseless internet conspiracy theory whose followers believe that a cabal of Satan-worshipping Democrats, Hollywood celebrities, and billionaires runs the world while engaging in pedophilia, human trafficking, and the harvesting of a supposedly life-extending chemical from the blood of abused children.
Doesn't sound so good when you...
Oh no, I'm not even done. I'm not
Okay.
even done. QAnon followers believe that Donald Trump is waging a secret battle against this cabal and its deep state collaborators to expose the malefactors and send them all to Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah. And as The Guardian points out, there are also subplots, quote, about John F. Kennedy Jr. being alive, which he's not, the Rothschild family controlling all the banks, which they don't, and children being sold through the website of the furniture retailer Wayfair, which they are not. So there's that.
Oh my God, lizard people, everyone. Or rather, lizard people.
No, the lizard is part of this too. We have lizard person conspiracy, which says that intelligent reptile humanoids sent here by aliens live among us and are secretly controlling America. Queen Elizabeth, George W. Bush, the Clintons, Bob Hope, all lizard people.
And this matters because there is evidence that Anthony Quinn Warner, who blew up his RV in downtown Nashville a little while back, believed in lizard people. And more comically, Lynn Wood, the attorney who has filed many lawsuits disputing Trump's election, recently tweeted about having evidence that John Roberts, among others, has been caught on videotape raping children, and that, stay with me now, they are being blackmailed, and their blackmailers were hacked by an online group called the Lizard Squad.
Yeah. Okay. Just to be clear, the Lizard Squad is a real thing. It's a black hat hacking group that does not claim to be lizard people, but Lynn Wood is also involved in the most recently created conspiracy theory in American life, one that we've been able to watch grow in real time, replicating in the petri dish of social media and right-wing media.
And that is the one that President Trump keeps lying about. That's the one that says he won the election when he didn't, that votes were stolen from him when they weren't. And it has its own Baroque forms of conspiracy promulgated by lackeys like Rudy Giuliani, Lynn Wood, and Sidney Powell, all of whom claim, for instance, that Dominion voting machines were somehow corrupted by the dead corpse of Hugo Chavez. And I think Dominion voting is suing now, et cetera. And
to be clear, we are not saying that, Dominion voting.
We
think you did a good job. Fine.
And this is why some of our country people decided to storm and desecrate the Capitol building, the People's House, and smear shit in it, which is not what one does when it's the People's House.
All of which is to say that this is a golden or golden shower age of conspiracy theories that a good chunk of our population think are credible and are willing to commit violent terrorist acts on our center of government as a result. But for a long time, conspiracy theories have been the stuff of literary and commercial fiction and movies. And today we have two wonderful guests here to talk about this. Later on the show, we'll talk to Professor James Plath, editor of a volume of critical essays on conspiracy theories in literature.
But first, we're thrilled to talk to Jenny Offill. Jenny is the author of the novels Last Things, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and a finalist for the LA Times First Book Award, and Department of Speculation, which was shortlisted for the Folio Prize, the PEN/Faulkner Award, and the International Dublin Award. She lives in upstate New York and teaches at Bard College and in the Low Residency Program at Queen's University. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I think just to start off, I'd like to ask you how you felt, not as a novelist, but just as a person watching the assault on the Capitol last week. What were you saying about it to the people closest to you?
Um, I had been very worried about it. I remember saying to a friend of mine the day before, I just hope we don't have an armed assault on the Capitol tomorrow, because some of the people that I read on Twitter are authoritarianism scholars, and they were concerned about it, as were people who study extremist websites. But I thought that that was just kind of my doomy mindset running away with me. But when it actually happened, I was with my daughter, and so I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what was going to be seen on the screen. So I actually went and played a game with her instead of watching it, and pieced it together afterwards. But I have, I was in New York for 9/11, and I kind of have that feeling like I did in the days afterwards, where you've just seen something unfold. It's so frightening. This felt like a very near miss for a lot of people. And of course, I think 5 people died, or 4.
Yeah.
In the middle
What
of
were
your
you
novel, Weather, you have a list of questions that your main character, Lizzie, is asked in her role as a librarian. And while I was reading the novel, I came to think of them as conspiracy questions. I wondered if you could read that list, and then maybe we could talk about how you put it together.
Sure. People also ask, what will disappear from stores first? Why do humans need myths? Do we live in the Anthropocene? What is the cultural trance? Is it wrong to eat meat? What is surveillance capitalism? How can we save the bees? What is the Internet of Things? When will humans go extinct?
So what was your what was your mind frame when you put together these questions that the librarian's getting? I mean, I'm going somewhere with this, but I was just kind of want to know what you were thinking when you were writing it.
Well, I was feeling a sense of that there were almost these currents of conspiracy floating around in the air, floating around in the ether. And some of them were questions that, in fact, scholars are addressing, like about surveillance capitalism, how much of our data is being captured and monitored. And others were about the natural world falling apart, but not with a sense that we have any agency in that. It's sort of like what's happened to the bees, as if there were a more complicated explanation than the human impact on all sorts of animals and plants. So I think I wanted to kind of have a list of those where the register changed, but the kind of sense of something falling apart was the same, something larger than we could comprehend at the time.
I mean, it's meaningful. Obviously, it's like poetry, right? There's the last line is the one about extinction, right? But there all those other prior thoughts are related to that in some way. I especially focused on the line, "Why do humans need myths?" Because I don't want to in any way downplay the dangerous, villainous bad faith of the conspiracy theories that we talked about at the top of the show, and that we're going to be talking about later with James Plath. But in the end, myths are like an overarching imaginary explanation for why things are the way they are, and which is often not the way we want them to be. And that's sort of the same thing as a conspiracy theory, isn't it?
Well, I mean, conspiracy theories feel like they have harnessed a very basic human desire, which is the part of our brain that it's important to recognize patterns so that we can assess danger. And also the part of our brain that makes meaning out of the patterns we see. But one of the things I think that takes the conspiracy theories in a different direction is that almost always there's a scapegoat that is behind it. But on top of that too, there's a sense that that you are looking at a series of events, whether it's the pandemic or an election result you don't think is the one you should have seen. And instead of feeling I don't have control over this, if you amass all this information together, you feel like, oh, actually, I understand it, and very few other people do. So you go from having no sense of agency to a lot of sense of agency. And I think in some ways it's really similar to this idea that sociologists talk about, the just world hypotheses, which is basically you get what you deserve and you deserve what you get, which often underlies people who believe in these right-wing ideologies.
Well, maybe that's one of the myths that we live with, the myth of meritocracy.
Yes, I think very much so. You know, we all hear all the time about the American dream, but I feel like increasingly that idea has been shown as something that only was a achievable dream for a very small segment of Americans from the beginning.
I also wonder if, Sugi, maybe I want you to think about this too, is like, is it possible that the way conspiracy theories are constructed now has to do also, they're changing because of technology? Like some kinds of conspiracy theories work really good on Twitter because you can investigate them through pictures. Like the way that the electioneering stuff went, like people would get film of the people counting votes and they'd say, this chest is being moved, something was bad happening there. And so people are able to be involved in it and feel like they're doing sort of pretend detective work.
Yes, I mean, I think the Twitter detective is a real thing for good and for ill. I mean, right now we have a lot of people who are trying to identify the people that rushed into the Capitol, and so you have that whole world of people doing that. But I think that one of the things that we maybe know on some level, but can sort of be easy to forget, is that when leaders lied repeatedly in the past, they really weren't able to pass along those falsehoods as quickly. And our brains are not really able. There's some interesting stuff that they've done some studies where most people, repetition starts to feel like truth. So the incredible onslaught of social media, the amount of information we have to take in, if that is being manipulated by a bad actor, then we almost have no easy defense against it because it's just coming too fast for anything but our most emotional brain to react to.
It's interesting to me the way that, and I so appreciated the depiction of that feeling of overwhelm in Weather. Whitney, what you're saying seems like there's this sort of interesting gray area between like the personal and the public. I was reading yesterday this story about an 18-year-old who identified her mother and her aunt and her uncle.
I saw that.
And immediately reported it. And sort of like the way that, and that sort of intensely personal confirmation was actually so much more reliable than, I also this morning watched a video of a man being arrested who yelled, you're treating me like a fucking Black person. And it was sort of offered as proof on Twitter of the kind of racism of this group of people, which of course is true. And then someone else said that video was from 2017.
Right.
And so, and even I worked as a journalist. I should have a skeptical mind. I should avoid my own confirmation bias. And
I totally 100% thought that video was from now. I just saw it this morning.
Yeah.
Right. Or the video of the Trump family cheering on, looking at the screen. Originally, it looked like it was happening while they were rushing the Capitol. It turned out to be the rally beforehand. Still quite disturbing, frankly, but you're right about confirmation bias. I mean, I think all of us have it. And especially in moments where we're, it's a normal reaction right now to be terrified and enraged and worried and not have enough information. So normally, like I feel like I want to like seek information all the time. And when we get anything that feels true, that is the part that gets in. I mean, Timothy Snyder, who I've really been following for years. In fact, one of my friends wrote to me today saying, your boyfriend, Timothy Snyder, has a great op-ed because I used to hand out that book on tyranny to people, like candy. And he talks about how when information moves that fast, what we end up doing is just fixating on what feels true and not having as many of the layers of like fact checking and understanding, and that you might, when you're talking about as a journalist looking at something.
That's fascinating. I think that maybe the piece that your friend was referring to is the essay. He wrote a long essay that I think is going to be in the New York Times Magazine on Sunday called The American Abyss.
Oh, right. I think you're right. It might not be out yet. I read it online.
Yeah, it's online, and it's so every paragraph. I was sort
and
of
he talks about Hannah Arendt too, who I think is is such an interesting person to read right now, because, you know, she talked about the great lie, and that certain things like the virulent anti-Semitism that spurred the Holocaust has to be a big lie. It has to be like Jews run the world, or da 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 da. And that right now we have this lie that the election was stolen. And one of the points he makes is that, interestingly, she said that these can only take root in people when there's already a level of loneliness. And so the fact that these conspiracy theories have gotten so much worse during the pandemic, I think, is something that's going to be really interesting to try to untangle later. You know, so many people alone at home looking for answers about an event that they don't understand, that no one understands.
In an interview you did with The Guardian, you quote the philosopher, or I always forget how to say, is it Mircea?
I think it's Mircea. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's Romanian.
Mircea.
I'm always worried I'm gonna, all these things I've only read.
We'll just go with Eliade, because I know that's
Okay.
right. Mircea Eliade, his concept of slow apocalypse. I went jogging on the day of the coup, as I've done almost every day of Trump's presidency, and as I did every day before Trump's presidency. I've done that ever since I knew that climate change was inevitable and disastrous. That night, you know, rather than talking to my 11-year-old son about this, which I'll do at some point, I suppose, you know, I played Dungeons and Dragons with him, you know. And I wonder if in part your book is an effort to recreate that particular feeling of doom and like regular life coexisting.
Yeah, I really thought specifically about that. Like, how could I capture that feeling of kind of almost toggling back and forth between apocalyptic thought and everyday life? Because unless that's your full-time job, to try to prevent the ravages of climate change, or whatever it is, then you're probably going to be coming in and out of it. And so I found it very jarring, very strange to be, once I started researching the climate stuff, it was very strange to have this incredibly dark thoughts that were always there. And I do think that those routines, though, I mean, if you look at people who've lived through sieges or wartime, one of the things they talk about is how important it was any kind of little normal ritual they could do. And that might be something that seems trivial from the outside, like someone might want to try to make lipstick out of something that they hadn't done to have a sense of normalcy. You know, some of the women in Sarajevo talk about that. And I think all of those things are actually what hold us together. You know, the running, or you asked what I was doing during the insurrection. I was playing Stardew Valley with my daughter, you know, where we like pretend milked cows and pretend like took things from our garden. I've never played a video game before in my life until 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways of coping with this, and some of them are short-term and some of them are long-term, but routine is a big one.
I think it's going to be so interesting to see how we all cope with the inevitable disruptions routine that are awaiting us in just the next several days. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us. And we want to encourage our listeners to go out and pick up Weather and Jenny's other books. Jenny, thanks.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you.
Thanks for being here.